Man dies and he goes to heaven. And of course he arrives there and St. Peter meets him at the pearly gates. And Peter wants to let him know, well, this is how it works to get into heaven. You need to get 100 points. So how do you get 100 points? He says, you tell me all the good things that you've done, and I give you a certain number of points for each item. Depending on how good it was, you reach 100 points, you get in. Guy's thinking, this is going to be great. I will ace this. Okay, the man says, I was married to the same woman for 50 years, and I never cheated on her, not even in my heart. That is wonderful, says St. Peter. That's worth 3 points. 3 points, he says. Not too happy about it. Adds to his list, well, I attended church all my life and supported its ministry with my tithe and service. Terrific, says St. Peter. That's certainly with 1 more point. 1 point? Golly, says the man. This was written in the days of Gomer Pyle. Golly, says the man. It's old. It's been around churches for a long time. 1 point? How about this? I started a soup kitchen in my city and worked in a shelter for homeless veterans. Fantastic. That is good for 2 more points, says Peter. 2 points, the man cries. At this rate, the only way I will get into heaven is by the grace of God. Bingo, says Peter. Come on in. So here's the question for today. Can a person who lives by good morals, goes to church, keeps the rules as much as he can that person be declined entrance into heaven? Is it possible that on that day, the good person can hear the words from Christ, depart from me, I never knew you? Well, let's see what Jesus has to say about it. You ready? Matthew chapter 12, beginning in verse 43. Jesus says, when an unclean spirit goes out of a man, he goes through dry places, seeking rest, and he finds none. And then he says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when he comes, he finds it empty, swept, and put in order. And then he goes and he takes with him 7 other spirits that are more wicked than himself. And they enter and dwell there, and the last state of that man is worse than the first. So shall it be also with this wicked generation. So what do we have here, this first verse? It is the dangerous consequences of rejecting Jesus. Let me illustrate what Jesus just taught here. Many years ago, I had a friend who's close to me. We were best friends in high school. How many years ago? Well, I graduated in 1977, so it was a long time ago. I'm old. I'm over 30 now, so I'm old. But many years ago, and we were very good friends. Sometime after high school, we both had bad lifestyles. Sometime after high school, I received Christ. He did not. When I received Christ, I started to tell everybody about Jesus, and he was one of them. And New Year's Eve was rolling around. At the time, I was attending Harvest Christian Fellowship in Riverside, and I invited my friend to the New Year's Eve service, believing that Pastor Greg would give an altar call that night, and he did. My friend who was sitting next to me was the first person to respond when the altar call came. And I thought, this is sweet, man. My friend just received Christ. Well, here's what happened. Before we went to church, I told my friend, I said, here's the deal. I'd love you to go to church with me. He didn't have a ride anywhere, and he wanted to go to a party. He said, I will go to the church with you if you give me a ride to the party afterwards. I thought, fair enough. I'll get him there. He'll get saved and won't want to go to the party. So he comes forward. He goes through the altar call, says the sinner's prayer. I asked him afterwards, he has a Bible in his hand. I said, I'm like, how was it? And he goes, I don't want this Jesus stuff. He said, I just want to be cleaned up. I don't want this lifestyle I am living anymore. Now take me to the party. So I did, and I think he gave me back his Bible, but I can't remember that many details. I took him to the party, and he cleaned up his life for a time. Got good morals for a time. I believe it was about a year. Started to do things right, didn't go to church, didn't want Jesus. And then we lost contact. I became more on fire for the Lord. He became worse. The lifestyle he once lived, he took it to the nth degree. Several years after, two of my friends went and visited him, unknown to me, and they came to me and they said, hey, there's somebody that you need to see. He's dying, he's at home, he's on hospice, the doctors have given him 3 weeks to live. And I said, who is he? He told me, he's your friend from high school. I went and saw my friend, he was dying from AIDS. And praise the Lord, he prayed to receive Christ. I'll see him again in heaven. And he did die in 3 weeks, just as the doctors had said. But this is the principle Jesus is teaching here in these verses. My friend did not want Christ. What he wanted was a good life. He cleans up his life, but it's empty. Christ was not dwelling there. The condition of that man, 7 times worse later, down the road. The original demon here in the passage that Jesus is giving us, he says, hey man, this house, this person is clean. It is empty. He finds out, verse 44, when the demon comes, he says he finds it empty, swept, and put in order, cleaned up. The person's got a cleaned up life, but he says it's still empty. So then he says this, and it's absolutely crazy. Actually, just before that, he says, I will return to my house. He calls this man, who has good moral characters at this point, his house is swept, it's kept in order. He says, I will return, this demon says, to my house. The first thing that we note here is the danger of a demon. So we read in the opening verse 43, that the man, he had an unclean spirit that left him. What's an unclean spirit? It's a demon. A demon is a fallen angel. When Lucifer rebelled against God, 2/3 of the angels rebelled with him. Fallen, cast out of heaven, fallen angels, demons. The principalities and powers of the air, the spiritual hosts of wickedness, is what the New Testament calls them. So a demon is a fallen angel, spiritual host of wickedness. And the term unclean that Jesus uses here, it represents the wicked, vile nature of all demons. We are not told why the demon left the man, but John MacArthur points out that it may be that the man made a good moral decision to forsake a particular sin in which this demon had entrapped him, so that the demon no longer had as much control over him that he once had. But the problem is, he's still empty. He does not have Christ. Herein we learn of an enormous problem. There are people that say yes to Jesus, but it is not genuine. What they really wanted is what my friend wanted. I want a clean life, but I do not want Jesus. They are trapped by a sin they hate, and they know it's not right, and they know it has them in chains. It's its own prison, and the walls are the enticement to the sin itself, whatever type of sin it may be. So they make a decision to rise above that, and they say no to that sin. Perhaps they start going to church and get straight and get cleaned up, but they never made a genuine commitment to Christ. They never genuinely repented. So here the demon says, I will return to my house, for my house is empty, is void. The Bible speaks of this space inside each person. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11, the Bible says, God has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts. Inside every single person that lives, there is a place, an eternal place, that only Christ can fill. Think of it, a shape like the cross. Only Christ can fill that space. But it's a void. It's an empty space. And empty spaces, voids naturally act like a vacuum. It will be filled with something. If not Jesus, it will be filled with sin or whatever it is that a person does in an attempt to bring them genuine peace. But only Christ can fill that spot. We know of the death of Robin Williams, comedian and actor, died last year sometime, and had it all. He had fame, he had fortune, he had it all. He was funny. But to hear of his death is tragic, and to hear of some of the things he said about his own life is heartbreaking. I've read the excerpts from things he said. He felt that he had a demon in him. But sometimes we see a person at a church and we think, man, that's awesome. And a couple of years goes by and they're still in church and we think, man, this is great. You knew them before they ever came to church, right? And you're thinking, this is fantastic, man. They're doing great. They're going to Bible study. They're serving, and all of a sudden they disappear. You haven't seen them in a year. And you start finding out that their state now is worse than it ever was before they ever started going to church. Their commitment to Christ was only superficial. So what do we have? We have the danger of a demon. We also have the danger of a good life. Keep in mind, in context, Jesus had been challenging the Pharisees, the religious leaders, on their man-made religion and rules and regulations and how they did their religion in an attempt to please God. The main point of Jesus was not upon principles of demon possession. His main point was the seriousness of rejecting him as completely as the religious leaders did. With these religious leaders, this rejection and opposition of Jesus would leave them much worse off than they ever were before. So much so that in verse 45, he says, this wicked generation would find that their last state is worse than their first. You remember in the New Testament where Jesus is brought before Pontius Pilate. And then Pontius Pilate takes Jesus before the people, and he also has Barabbas brought in, Barabbas who was a criminal, right? But at Passover, it was legal for Pontius Pilate to release one prisoner to the Jews. So he gives them that opportunity. He's thinking, this is it. I will bring the worst criminal I know. His name is Barabbas. I'll present Barabbas or Jesus, Yeshua, who had done nothing wrong. I'll present them to the Jews. Certainly they'll pick Jesus. So Pilate says to the Jewish religious leaders and the people there, who do you want me to release to you today? Jesus or Barabbas, this awful, horrible criminal? Barabbas. We want Barabbas. What should I do with Yeshua? What should I do with Jesus? Crucify him. Crucify him. Matthew tells us that they got upset. And they said, may his blood be upon us and upon our children. Their last state became worse than where they were on the day they officially rejected Christ. They were empty. They were a people void of the God of heaven. They rejected their Messiah. And just a few decades later, in 70 A.D., Jerusalem and the Jews were thrashed by the Romans. Their last state was worse than before. Scattered were the Jews to the four corners of the earth. Jerusalem was literally destroyed. In large measure, they rejected Jesus because he wasn't messianic enough for their taste. He wasn't the political Messiah that they wanted. And neither did he follow their man-made rules. And their desire for a different kind of Savior led them to ruin by 70 A.D. We want a different kind of Messiah. The Pharisees did not want the type of Messiah that they had in Jesus. They did not want a Messiah that said the religious philosophy was not good enough. They did not want a Messiah that said they were sinners. What they wanted was a political Messiah. and a Messiah to overthrow Rome, but not a Messiah that said, you're sin. You're in sin. You're a sinner. They were religious, but they did not know God. Now note this here. Don't miss this. At the end of verse 45, so shall it be. It's talking about their last state is worse than their first. 7 other demons, worse than himself, he goes out and gets. The house is empty, right? The man's empty. Their last state is worse than their first. So shall it be, end of verse 45, with this wicked generation. What does this teach us? That entire generation of people so rejected Christ in general that they were completely empty, even though they had religion. A whole generation, a whole people, they had religion, but they were empty. They did not have Christ. They rejected the Messiah because he was not the Messiah that they wanted. You know that I am a straight shooter, right? And here's the scoop. I believe America is in trouble. In the 1960s, God was removed from school. Prayer was removed from school. Imagine our children, prayer removed from God's, our children removed from God's protection. Pretty radical. That's back in the 60s. That's when I was going to school. I was just a wee little lad. Our house is empty. It has been empty. An entire generation, an entire nation destroyed 30, 40 years after they rejected the true God, was Israel. So here we are, these years later, God removed. We do not want God. What we have is an empty house. Their condition, their state is far worse off than it ever was before. And I know a whole lot of people do not want to hear this, even in our church. America is in trouble. Now, let me ask you this. What kind of preacher do you want? Do you want to come here on a Sunday, and do you want to hear me give you all the warm fuzzies and make you feel really good, and then you leave, you're so happy, so happy? Or would you rather have the truth and recognize we've got trouble? Wake up to the fact we have trouble. We're not living in days where you're going to have, listen, look at what happened to Nazi Germany. You want to know what happened to Nazi Germany? The preachers were given an opportunity. Preach political. Preach what the state was in agreement with the state, and if you do not, you will be in jail. Most preachers went with the state. The others ended up in jail. I'm telling you, and I've been telling you this as long as I've been teaching Bible prophecy, almost 11 years now, that the day was coming. It's arrived. And we need to be warned. And I'm not going to stop warning you. We need the truth. The dam has been broken, and Jesus is coming. But the reality of it is, what we are experiencing is exactly what God said we would experience. Exactly. And I haven't preached anything different in my 11 years here. It happened exactly as God said things would happen. Wake up. I hope America wakes up. We have trouble. One more thing before we move on is an empty house is an open invitation. When an unclean spirit goes out of a man and he goes through the dry places seeking rest and he finds none, Jesus says, apparently demons desire a human host and look for a place among the empty, seeing it as an invitation. So Jesus says he finds none. So what does he say? I will return to my house. Spurgeon writes, his audacity is amazing, this demon. He did not build or buy that house, and yet he has no right to it, yet he says, it is my house. And note also, a demon can only inhabit someone if he finds them empty. That is, without the indwelling spirit of Jesus Christ. If it is empty, it does not matter to the demon if it has also been swept and put in order, if it's got religion. Also from Spurgeon, the devil has no objection to his house being swept and garnished, For a moralist may be as truly his slave as the man of debauched habits, so long as the heart is not occupied by his great foe, Jesus Christ, and he can use the man for his own purposes. The adversaries of our souls will gladly live in that man, even if he goes to church. And he calls the man, the demon does, he calls the man, my house. That's frightening. The good news is, as the Puritan John Trapp said, if we are filled with Jesus, being born again by the Spirit of God, then we cannot be empty and therefore inhabited by demons. Though he shake his chain at us, he cannot fasten his fangs in us. That's the good news. The frightening news is the demon says, you're empty, you are my house. I own you. That's frightening. But there is good news. You want some good news? Okay, number 2, there's only 2 main points today. It's the incredible privilege of being identified with Jesus' true family. Look at this, verse 46. While Jesus was still talking to the multitudes, behold, his mother and brothers, they stood outside, seeking to speak with Jesus. Then one said to Jesus, look, your mother and your brothers are standing outside seeking to speak with you. But he answered and he said to the one who told him, who is my mother and who are my brothers? And he stretched out his hand toward his disciples and said, here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and my sister and my mother. Wow. Follow with me for just a minute. I want to connect this to our spiritual family because that's what he's talking about. Who's my family members? Follow with me just a minute. Ephesians chapter 3 tells us, for those who know Christ, available to us are the unsearchable riches that come in knowing him. What are the unsearchable riches? Check it out. The word unsearchable, it means past finding out, unable to trace, cannot be comprehended. Wow. I think of these things. The other day I was having a conversation with somebody who had a whole bunch of questions about the Bible. He says, well, this appears to be a contradiction. This appears to be this, and this appears to be that. And he's going to all these places that are contrasts. Contrast of earth with heaven. Let me give you one thing to think about along these lines. I look at the animal kingdom here on earth, and I think it is so crazy and so cool. Sometimes I'll watch National Geographic, and I'll see some of the crazy fish that are on there. I'm thinking, and only like 2 people in the world could see them, but now with cameras, more people can see them. I mean, got these crazy looking things. And then the animals, you go to the San Diego Zoo, you got giraffes and lions and tigers and bears, oh my, and all kinds of stuff down there, right? But I mean, all kinds of these crazy, and they're all different. Insects are different. And we have this giant beetle at our house yesterday. This beetle was this big, and slight exaggeration. It's like the guy who catches the fish. You should have seen the one that got away. Well, the one you kept is only this big. Well, anyways, this beetle, it was really big for Hemet. I mean, it was enormous. And I was looking at it going, wow, must be all this humidity. This thing's seriously eating fertilizer or something. I don't know what it's doing, but it was big. But I mean, even the smallest of insects to the greatest of beasts, God's creation is crazy. Listen, but it's all cursed. Can you imagine the unsearchable things past finding out? What are the animals like in heaven? The Bible tells us what some of the crazy descriptions are. We're thinking, that sounds weird. I've never seen an animal like that before. Of course, you aren't going to see it until you get to heaven. Think, wow, I can only imagine if this is here on earth. They got this at the San Diego Zoo. Woohoo, it's going to be so cool. Another illustration. In the Bible, do you know what streets are paved with? Revelation 21 tells us. Gold, you know what kind of gold? Gold, or what it looks like, gold that is so pure, it's transparent. It's like glass. Can you imagine that? God is giving us a contrast. Down here on earth, you got asphalt, you got potholes, you drive down Florida Avenue, there's another pothole, whoa, look out. And you know on the roads you go on, right? You know where the potholes are, so you try to avoid this one, go around. You can do a really cool course driving out here on some streets. But and God says, listen, in heaven, I've got The thing that you count the most valuable here on earth, I've got gold, not just any gold, gold you ain't never seen before. It's like glass. I pave the streets with that stuff in heaven. God is giving us a contrast. But his ways are past our finding out. As high as the heavens are above the earth, so are his ways above our ways, his thoughts above our thoughts. His ways are infinitely beyond our understanding, so much so that the Apostle Paul said, man, I can't even begin to describe the things that I saw. They are unsearchable, past finding out, unable to trace, cannot be comprehended. But who are these things for? His family. Whose family? The family of the Lord Jesus Christ. John chapter 14. Jesus said, don't let your heart be troubled, neither be afraid. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions, and I am going to go and prepare a place for you, that where I am, you may be also. Can you imagine? We got our houses out here that are all in disrepair. Y'all's got to fix them. Y'all's got to paint them. Y'all's got to put a new roof on them. Jesus has built this house. Can you imagine? 2,000 years he's been there. Can you imagine? I look at that and think, well, you're right. I can't imagine because it's unsearchable. It's past finding out. And we put all of our eggs in this basket on earth and then we die. Wow. But who are his spiritual family that these things are for? He identifies in verse 47. Someone said to Jesus, your mother and your brothers are outside and they want to speak with you. Quite likely, Jesus' earthly family was embarrassed of him. We know from various texts. Do you know Jesus has an earthly family? I'll show you if you don't believe it yet. But he had an earthly family, and quite likely they were embarrassed of him. Here it tells us, look what it says here. Verse 47, they wanted to speak with him. We want to have a word with you, Jesus. We want to have a talk with you. He's talking about religion. He's saying, man, he's already told us repeatedly, religion is not going to get you into heaven. And here he's talking about a relationship. What you need is a relationship with God, part of the family. Man, if you're part of the family, you get into heaven. But he has physical brothers and sisters. No, he doesn't. Yes, he does. No, he doesn't. Yes, he does. He really does. Does the Bible really say that? Listen. I was raised Catholic, altar boy, Catholic school, through 8th grade. And then I wasn't smart enough, so they wouldn't keep me anymore. But Catholic church until I got saved. So I suddenly read this with my Catholic background after I come to Christ. And here I find out, or I hear that Jesus has brothers and sisters. This just cannot be. I was somewhat offended by it. I was certainly put off by it. It was a hard pill to swallow because I was taught that Mary, Jesus' earthly mother, was a perpetual virgin. How could this be? I was taught in this passage and other similar passages in the New Testament, it did not mean literal brothers of Christ, but cousins or something of that sort. But this is literal brothers. Check this out. Turn in your Bible one page to the right. That's all you got to do to go where we're going right now. Matthew chapter 13. Look at this, just one page, two if you have a large print Bible. Chapter 13, verse 55. Listen to what Jesus says, or what Matthew writes about Jesus' family. And the religious leaders, what they are saying. Here's what they're saying. Is this not the carpenter's son? Who's the carpenter? Joseph, right? So look at these verses in context. Wait a minute. They're talking about earthly father, right? In context. What else do they say? Is this not his mother called Mary? Aha, wait a minute. Mary and Joseph in context. His earthly mother, his earthly father. What else? And look at this. His brothers, and they're even named. James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas. Wow. They're even named. And it doesn't stop there. Look at the next verse. And his sisters. Jesus had sisters. Wow. There were girls in his family. And his sisters, are they not all with us? Look at this, verse 56, the end of it. Where then did this man get All these things, all this wisdom, where did it come from? He's like the Messiah. But we know who his earthly family is. That's what they're saying. Jesus had real brothers and real sisters. Theologian D.A. Carson writes, the most natural way to understand brothers is that the term refers to sons of Mary and Joseph, daughters of Mary and Joseph, and thus to the brothers and sisters of Jesus on his mother's side. Efforts to make brothers or sisters mean something else are nothing less than far-fetched exegesis in support of a dogma that originated much later in the New Testament. But we know from other passages in the New Testament, his family didn't dig him, his brothers and sisters. They didn't receive him very well. They thought he was crazy. We know that from elsewhere in the New Testament. So we can imagine what the dinner conversations were like. Jesus is the oldest, right? He's gone. He's adopted because Joseph was his adoptive father. So we got that. But still, you got the half-brother, half-sister thing going on there. And so Jesus is oldest. He's out doing all kinds of ministry. We can imagine what was going on at the dinner table when Jesus wasn't around. Mom, Dad, you wouldn't believe what Yeshua was doing today. It was nuts. You should have heard what he told the religious leaders. He's always telling them they're messing up here. And then, it was crazy. He turned like these fish and loaves into enough for thousands of people. I don't know what the trick was, but something was wrong with our older brother. We know that was the thinking from his family in various places. We can imagine what it was like being raised with Jesus. I heard with Walt Disney that when his parents raised him, Walt Disney, Mr. Mickey Mouse, he was told, paint the barn, we're going into town, we'll be back. And it was like an all-day trip into town, so Walt painted the barn. The story said that when the mom and dad came back home where Walt had been painting the barn, when they arrived home, he had painted a giant mouse head on the barn. I would imagine the creator of Disney, listen, that's nothing compared to the creator of the universe, right? The creator of all things. Could you imagine that? Wow. Jesus responds, who is my mother and who are my brothers? One author noted we might have expected that Jesus would give special favor to his earthly siblings, but he did not. But this doesn't mean he didn't show them kindness. He's just stating a point. He's making a spiritual point. Who are my brothers? Who are my sisters? Who is my mother? Notice how he doesn't say anywhere in here, who is my father, right? He's got one father. But who is it? He who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother or sister or mother. Charles Spurgeon wrote, he is not ashamed to call them brethren. That's good, isn't it? There's a difference between rules and religion versus relationship. Rules and religion trying to reach God versus relationship, God reaching down to man. John writes about this family relationship and how to have it. In John chapter 1, verse 12, all who received him, he gave them the right to be children of God. Wow. Look at what the difference is between religion and relationship. Religion is man's attempt to reach up to God by doing good things. I'm going to go to church. I'm going to do this religious stuff my way, not this way. I want the Jesus to my knowing, the Jesus to my understanding. I want the Jesus to my political views. I want the Jesus to this. I want the Jesus to that. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to form my religious thing. I'll go to church all the time, whatever it is. I will have a clean house. Religion is man attempting to reach up to God. Relationship is God reaching down to man by sending his son. Matthew Poole wrote, the only thing to be further learned from this paragraph is how dear believers are to Christ. He counts them as dear as mother, as dear as brothers, as dear as sisters. The problem with relationship is this. It confronts us on all of our ideals. It confronts us on the religion of our tradition. It confronts us on the religion that we were raised in. It confronts us on how to reach God the way that we believe, our own philosophies. relationship with God through God the Son tells us that we are sinners. But God did not send his Son to condemn us, but that through him we would be saved. We cannot be saved. We cannot be forgiven by trying to keep the rules, whatever those rules may be. Your house can be swept and kept clean and in order and empty. We must be careful. We can be religious and not know Christ. We can go to church and not be saved. We can say our prayers and never be forgiven. The problem? We can have enough Jesus to be informed, but not enough Jesus to be transformed. As one author put it, religion is like trying to fix our spiritual problem with duct tape and WD-40. Jesus, or God, fixed it with a nail and a cross. Think of it like this. And I used this illustration not too long ago, so bear with me for a couple of minutes as we wrap up. A boy, 12, 13, 14 years old, going through puberty. I know this is a real thing because my son is at that age, right? So that boy at that age starts to, he's got body odor, seriously, right? So it's like you open up the door to the room, you're like, this room needs hazmat or something to come in there and clean it out or whatever it is. But you got it, right? How many of you have had, that's all you, as far as adolescence, puberty, any kind of experience? Well, come on, we all have, right? You went through it, somebody else went through it that you know. Jiminy crickets. This isn't like you're going to heaven or hell if you don't or do or raise your hand. So anyways, it's at age and you stink and you need to take a shower, right? But you think it's fine. You think your mom and dad are just rah, 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 rah. So did I say I know I'm experiencing it? So he sees girls. He thinks, hey, they're kind of cute. And he's starting to reason in his mind because that girl knows that he stinketh. And he's starting to wonder, you know how this works, right? My son is going to so kill me. This is not good. I'm going to owe him a lot. Pray for me. So I'm talking about all boys at this point, right? Okay, thank you. Got to clarify that. So she's cute. She knows he stinketh. He doesn't think he stinketh. But that's probably better than, the smell he's got going on. Here, he's looking at her going, they realize, I want something better. Here's the problem. Sometimes we think giving up our religion is giving up something really good. Giving up our sin, I don't want to give that part up. Listen, it stinketh. Everybody knows it stinks but you. It's not that you are giving something up. What you are getting is something that is far better, unsearchable, unknowable, unfathomable. You cannot begin to comprehend it. Get rid of that which stinketh. And surrender wholeheartedly to the Lord. It's religion that doesn't get us there. It's sin that keeps us from knowing Christ. Listen, I'd like to give any of you and all of you an opportunity right now. If you're saying, man, I might be empty. I don't know. I am empty. I don't know where I am. An opportunity right now to completely surrender that which stinketh to God and receive that which is so much better. I'm going to give you an opportunity to know Christ. Will you pray with me?